And that leads me into the next topic, which is what does the future of the sport look like? So we've knocked on all the things that we thought were wrong with those workouts last week, what we loved and what we hated. And there's some, I think, huge positives for the sport. Like testing those things will continue to improve, or at least challenge the athletes to improve their own games. But I think there are some negatives too at semifinals. We kind of saw like some of the workouts weren't viewer friendly. Some people were frustrated. There was miscommunication in the back. What does that mean for the sport moving forward? And do you think that we're in a position where we will continue to grow as a sport?
Yeah, I think so. To start off, are we 12 years into the regional semifinal-ish format, minus a 13. COVID year and minus the year of the sanctionals, which were obviously not run by CrossFit. So one of the things I keep coming back to is, one of the issues we've always seen is that there have been judging issues. There's not really been a way for people to address, no reps or, bad calls or things like that. There was never recourse. And this is the first year we've seen that start, right? We had this appeals process that was put into place, but I don't think that the appeals process is dialed in. I think some of the judging discrepancies and judging issues and standards issues are still a problem. And we're 12 or 13 years into, the sport, and we haven't gotten any better at those things. So I think that's a problem. That's still something that has to be addressed. So if there's a big negative for me, it's that. I think the programming was cool. I think it was novel, and I think could potentially be an opportunity to re-engage, viewers if the programming can be done in a way that's more viewer friendly. And we talked about this in the kind of the recap podcast after each of the nights about how we think they could have made them more viewer friendly. So I'm not going to go into that stuff in depth. But what I am excited about is that there are now new offshoots of CrossFit that I think are exciting. I think High Rocks is one of those things that you and I have talked about High Rocks a couple of times, and I think they have a really novel idea. So CrossFit really appeals, especially high-level competitive CrossFit, like semifinal level, appeals to people who are strong, who have high-level gymnastic skills, who have a pretty damn good capacity, like they're really fit. It appeals to that group. But there's this whole subset of people who are just never going to be big and strong, but they're super enduring, right? Like human physiology does have biases.
And they love to race.
And they don't want to get left out of high level, high stakes racing. And something like High Rocks has really brought that in. The races for the top level athletes are 60 minutes. And I think for, more average people, for us, it would probably be much closer to like 90 minutes.
Right.
And I think that time domain really does get missed in CrossFit testing.
Yes,
and it's a time domain that there's a whole subset of human physiology that really is tuned for that time domain that just gets completely missed in CrossFit testing. And I think some things like that I think that's really exciting. I think it's awesome that we now have these kind of branches that are starting to shoot off of the sport. And to be clear, High Rocks is not new, but it's really starting to break into...
It's blowing up.
Yes, It's really starting to break into the scene. It's blowing
up. For those who don't know what it is, say real quick. It's basically one test that they do every year, the same.
Yeah, it's the same exact test. They do it all over the world. Most of them are sold out. So when you go and look at them right now, I mean, it's really cool because they are growing, and there are friends and fans that are there watching. But I think the big thing is it's the same test every time. So you know what you're training for, which I want to get to and talk about. Like, could CrossFit do something similar?
Same test every time, and they've chosen movements where the standards are clear.
Yes, that was the next thing. That's
sorry,
very big.
No,
you're good. You're good. Those are the two things that I would just be interested. We'll ask the viewers in a second if they think that would be worth it. But could CrossFit do something that standards are very clear? Like, we could still have all the great movements that are in CrossFit, but like we use very similar standards every single year, the same standards. That just makes it easier for the judge and for the athlete to appeal if they have to, or for video review. You don't have the confusion that we had this year, which we'll touch on in a minute. And then again, the same test, like what you're training for, which I think long-term actually lends itself to viewership because like we've talked about before, it gets more and more exciting to see how far the body can go as opposed to someone failing a handstand push-up or sitting there and staring at the rope for a couple of minutes, which we saw the best athletes in the world do. Even the top 10 athletes had to wait on the rope, and it wasn't a race in a lot of those workouts at semifinals. So the workout is basically you run, and then there's 10K of running, you do a 1K run, and then there's a test, a 1K run and another test. And it's kind of, there's still some variance there.
And it's just 3, 2, 1, go, and you do it all at once?
You do it all at once.
It's not just running. It's run, there's a rower, there's a skier. Like they mix a lot of the elements that we see in CrossFit.
Yeah, sled, there's wall balls at the end, there's sled pulls, sled pushes, lunges, all kinds of different things that still add variety. But again, there is variance, but it's within the test. It doesn't change from competition to competition, which I think is cool.
And I think the movement selection has a high degree of judgeability, where some of the movement selection for, at least for semifinals this past year and probably for quarterfinals, would have what I would call low judgeability, where it's like it's hard to create a standard that's clear. Like the muscle up lockout. I'm not saying to take muscle ups out of the sport. That's my favorite movement in the entire sport, to be clear. But like the lockout issue that we see constantly year after year, where people's like, I am locked out. And they're like, no, you're not locked out. That's a no rep. That's a low judgeability movement versus something like high rocks, where they've chosen movements that are just very, like, you push the sled down and over the line, or you didn't. You did burpee broad jumps across the floor and got over the line, or you didn't, right? Like those are very easy to judge movements versus like the lockout. It's like, well, that might've been fully locked out, or maybe you just don't have full extension of your elbow.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, people still have complained about the movement standards in the judging at High Rocks.
For sure.
But High Rocks has fixed a lot of those things. They posted these like standard videos, and they've really standardized the movements, which again, it's easier to do that when you have the same test every single year or every single competition.
Let me try to barf this idea. The original question was the future of the sport.
Yeah.
And when you think about something like fashion, I wonder how many people are in love with what we know as the CrossFit sport right now, which is the unknown unknowable. How many people actually that's their jam? Or in the same way of, some shirt that people thought was stupid, you put on Justin Bieber, and now all the kids are like, oh, that's awesome. You know how fashion trends work.
Yeah.
If all of a sudden CrossFit, let's say High Rocks didn't exist, but starting next year it turned into that, do people just jump with it and they love that now? Is it more so that they want to be part of the Justin Bieber in this example, which is CrossFit? Or do they really love that programming? And if that programming left somewhere else, they'd follow it. Do you get my question?
Yes. And I think there's another, or is it a brand identity thing? Like if CrossFit became High Rocks, does everyone just go because CrossFit says it's CrossFit? Because HQ says that.
Huh. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm asking. Like, is it more about the trend, or like they want to be part of the cool thing? And if that was it, they would go? Or do they actually love the...
Here's what would be cool is like day one of a semifinal is like a half High Rocks event, right? So like all the athletes go through
They could have done that with event one, and it would have been much better than people just staring at the sled. Like they completely just screwed that workout up, and there's no way they'll come out and do like one of those videos behind the scenes and say, oh yeah, we meant the sled to be that hard. There's no way, because they essentially eliminated any of the endurance testing in any of the workouts because of that. So the run didn't matter, the ski didn't matter, the echo bike didn't matter. It all came down to how fast you could pull a sled, and then it also came down to how fast your sled moved on your lane, which is an issue.
Well, and then if you watched like the Oceania,
how much easier it was.
Yeah, it looked like they buttered the sleds essentially.
What's funny about it is CrossFit Games was and look, I had athletes there. It's awesome. They crushed it, and the sled was still really, really heavy. But CrossFit Games was reposting like, oh, this person now has the world record on event one. It's like, well, yes, because the flooring was easier to slide. There's nothing standardized, and that's the problem, is that you can't compare scores from week one to week two, and we won't be able to.
So do you think the future is standardized or no?
I think the future is standardized in the sense that if you want to compare scores between semifinals, then you have to have the same equipment and the same flooring and the same, there's a lot of other things that need to be identical in order for the testing to be like valid, intra-test.
Sure. It makes it almost impossible when you're doing it at different locations. For example, if you do a long row in Denver versus a long row in Florida, the way that the rower's reading it because of the air density changes the test.
Yes.
And also if you're someone that's not trained at a mile in elevation, that can also change.
I've done some rowing at altitude.
Right. And it can be challenging.
It's rough.
Now, if you've trained there, then it's different. So all of those things play. And I understand that's impossible for CrossFit just to fix overnight. But these are things that we've been talking about year over year over year. And the reason that this question was brought up, because people have asked us, is it seems like they're not going in the right direction, or they're not listening to their viewers, their coaches, their fans, so that they can make that.
Twist on the question is, how do you feel about the future of the sport?
I think
like after this year, I remember you came back into the hotel room, we stayed together, and I remember you saying like that was the worst. What was it? Athlete briefing.
The first night athlete briefing.
What did you say? You said, man, I've been coaching for 12 years and I've gotten better. and I just would have assumed that 12 years of athlete briefings, they would have gotten better. Something like that. You cracked me up.
But it wasn't, so to be clear, it wasn't Chuck's delivery of the athlete
Chuck
briefing.
did a great job.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
He did what he was supposed to do. The problem is what he was supposed to do wasn't clear.
Yes.
Right? It's because the standards weren't clear. So he ended up having to give these non-committal, non-answers.
They made him look bad.
Yeah, they made him look bad, and he's not bad. Like, he actually has gotten better at doing that over the last 10 or 12 years. The problem is that they haven't gotten better at the thing they need to get better at, which is making the standards clear so that it's standardized. That's the whole point of having a standard.
So back to my question was,
across athletes.
With that in mind, do you feel like, how do you feel about the future?
Man, I think we're like hanging on an edge. I feel like if they can correct some of these problems, that CrossFit still has growth opportunity. I think I've said this a bunch of times, and I know we've talked about this, that the bones of CrossFit itself, fitness racing, standardized fitness racing,
it's not going anywhere.
It's not going anywhere, right? People love the premise of this sport. Like 3, 2, 1, go. You go move that barbell 10 times and you run down there and you do, 10 rope climbs and you run back here and the first person back wins and the weights are the same and you run the same distance. But we're not seeing that, right? Weights weren't always the same. There was a team that had a misloaded barbell at the Orlando semifinals. Some of the teams had to go further to their barbell and like further to the finish line on some of there's just no standardization, which it detracts from the beauty and the simplicity of racing. I love racing sports. I always have. That's why I was a swimmer. That's why people are gravitate to racing sports. And this can be,
I think that's what
incredible.
They forget. I think that's a major theme is they forget that it is racing. And racing, you want to see what? The race.
Right.
And very often we don't, it's like that's the back burner, the race part.
So I'll answer it in a different way. I am fired up. Like there is an opportunity right now in the space, the fitness racing space for CrossFit or someone else to step in and make this there are so many good athletes that we can make this such a fun sport to watch and compete in. It's one of the few sports where the average person can do the same test, a variation of it at least, as the person. The only other one really is golf, in that you could play the same course and then you can see how much worse you are than someone else. But that's why people love golf. Like I know that maybe people around here in the CrossFit space don't, but there are 40 million golfers in the US and there's a reason for that. And if you watch football, like it's entertaining, but you can't just go and play. I'm not going to put pads on and hit Kyle. So this is one of those things that there's an opportunity to make this huge and super exciting if someone can step in and standardize the sport in a way that's fun and viewable.
And I'll be honest with that. I want it to be CrossFit. We talked about brand identity. I'm a CrossFitter, right? I have been since 2011. Like I love CrossFit and what the original ideas of CrossFit were, like broad work capacity across broad time and modal domain. That's what got me in here. And I'd love to see fitness racing that tests work capacity across broad time and modal domain and done in a way that prioritizes athlete safety and done in a way that is standardized and fair across lanes and across athletes and across regions. I would love to see that happen. And I hope that CrossFit can do it. That's why I said, I think it's hanging on an edge. I think if they make some really good decisions in this coming year, then we're going to see this thing continue to grow and potentially continue to blow up. But if they continue to do the same shit over and over and over without improving it, I'm pessimistic. And that's rare for me.
Yeah, that is rare. That is rare
for people who don't know Kyle.
That is very rare. You're probably kinder than I am, though, in that regard. That I'm not sure that I hope it's CrossFit, and I know that that's probably going to be a super touchy.
I don't think it should be.
Well, so here's any business that fails year over year for 12 straight years in listening to customer feedback, fan feedback, and the people that are actually working for them, which are the athletes. Let's just call it that, right? Like they're out there doing the work and aren't changing things, and then in fact doubling down. CrossFit posted something on their Instagram that basically said the standard is the standard. We're not going to make it any easier, and everyone can go and look at that. Whether that was saying anything to, or kind of like what do they call it? Subtweeting. Instagramming, whatever, you know what I'm saying, to people that were complaining about the standards, or if they just decided to post that, who knows? But it seems like they are doubling down on the almost nauseating old school, we're going to do it our way, and that's the only way. And again, like if these companies, these large companies did that, they wouldn't they would no longer exist. The reason that CrossFit exists is because the athletes continue to prop them up and follow the space no matter where it goes. I hope that someone else can come in, or if it is CrossFit, they're going to have to do a restructuring from the top down and say, we're going to completely wipe out this, the people that are there, including Bosman, and have a team of people, probably from different coaching organizations. I think it would be great to have someone from Mayhem and Proven and us and Training Plan and all these other great organizations to help with the programming.
To be clear, when that person becomes a part of whatever this programming collective, whatever you want to call it, when they become a part of that governing body, I think they've got to relinquish their ties to whatever programming body they were with, because that's another issue that has existed in the sport for a really long time, and that's the favoritism and kind of like the false secrecy where like no one knows what the workout. Yeah, well,
we've learned over the years that there's not.
I would say almost every year we find out that an organization has the workouts beforehand.
I've said this to you guys. Let's say it here. Let's pretend CrossFit, the company, what do? They have their methodology and their affiliates, right? And that's their business. And then they also have the sport, which is kind of marketing and also probably brings in some money. Let's just, to simplify this, let's say CrossFit just made hamburgers. They were a fast food chain.
Okay.
And then they also created this sport.
Called hamburger?
No. Okay. No. This sport that we're talking about. They also created it.
Yeah.
It would be weird to try to merge the two. Even though that the thing they're actually selling isn't hamburgers and it's fitness related, I just feel like they should not. The sport should be separate. Basketball and NBA.
I think I have a better way to look at this, right?
But they keep trying to merge these freaking things. CrossFit should be a title sponsor, not like Noble. It'd be the CrossFit Games, but they're the sponsor or whatever the sport's called. They shouldn't be there's this weird thing. I feel like a lot of our problems, and I'm looking for you to tell me, no, I'm wrong.
I'm not going to tell you, no, you're wrong. I
feel like a lot of our problems are strictly from that thing of this business. Let's pretend they're the hamburger company because that makes it easier in your head. Trying to be attached to the sport. As the same, it's like, no, y'all are different.
So I think it's even different than that. So if you look at the sport of powerlifting, right? It's not the sport of Westside barbell. It's not the sport of Wendler 531. Those are training methods that you can use to compete in the sport of powerlifting, right? So we have a sport that's named CrossFit, and we have a training methodology that's owned and named the same thing, CrossFit. And I think we have an issue. So we actually have fitness racing as a sport, if you like boil it down to what it most basically is.
Probably unhealthy for a lot of people to do.
Yes, it's probably
and counter to the message.
Yes, that's a really good point. So we have,
even though you can shoehorn it in there,
and CrossFit is one training methodology to get better at the sport of fitness racing. But so is Training Think Tank Compete. So is Mayhem Compete. So is Hard Work Pays Off. Like all those are training methodologies that you can use to improve fitness racing. And so I think that is where that's where the root of the problem really,
that's a good point.
Really lies.
Yeah, I mean, if you just followed CrossFit.com, you wouldn't be good at the sport. No. I mean, you just couldn't sustain a 3-day competition or 4 days at the games. Like you would have to follow one of these programs, these online programs.
Multiple people running. We need to name the sport and then multiple people run it, like the ABA and the NBA finally won out.
Yes. Brandon and I have talked about this a bunch. I don't want to rehash the story, but the same thing happened in triathlon. Same thing happened in swimming. Same thing has happened in golf.
We need competition. We need WCW versus the WWF. Monday Night Wars, baby.
Well, what is it now? Are there multiple wrestling federations?
AEW versus WWE.
Okay, and they're both thriving.
Do they have a training program?
I think.
Is there a WWE training program that you can use to become a WWE wrestler?
Yeah, one of Jenna DeLuca. Is that how you say it?
Is it the WWE training program though?
They have their own in-house thing, but then there's plenty of other people doing it.
Yeah. That was my point.
Right. Yeah. So you wouldn't have an in-house company that's also running the competition. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
That's like that's as bad as it gets.
Yeah. So, I mean, what would you want it to look like then? You are a much bigger fan than I think I am of the constantly varied, broad time, modal domains, continuing to test the athletes. Adam said that last week. He's, again, I think in your camp that you like the idea of continuing to push the athletes and challenge them, which I do too. But I think there's a way that you could challenge athletes without changing the complexity of the movements every year.
I think there's a blend. Right.
Okay.
You can, so one of the things you could do, like, let's just use the semifinal format where you have a morning test and an afternoon test Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Sure.
One of those tests each day can be a standardized test that you run every single year so that people can measure improvement. And you can actually say, hey, these people have gotten fitter from last year.
That'd be so cool.
Or
I
no,
at
these
least
people
want to see that done a few years to prove that that's not cool, because it sounds so cool.
I agree. It sounds like it would be awesome. And then the second test each day is the unknown and unknowable. So people have things that they're preparing for that are known and knowable. So we can see people get really good.
So six tests.
Yes.
3 of them, the morning test each day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, are all the retest, the same test each year.
Yes.
And then the PM test, the afternoon test, will be different every single year.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think
I like that.
That's already a better start.
One of the rules is that the PM test can't have the same movement selection as the AM test. So like the fixed tests are the fixed tests, and you cannot replicate any of the movements from the morning. And the fixed test should be very straightforward: an endurance test, a barbell test, and a gymnastics test. And they can be mixed, right? It doesn't have to just be clean and jerk as the barbell test, but like those things should be chosen to test the like really basic broad domains of fitness, right? Endurance, strength, and power, speed, or whatever you want to call it. And then the unknown and unknowable test, that's where you get to mix it. And then the games just gets more complex from there.
Okay. The games wouldn't have retests?
Games would have retests.
Okay.
But it would have a broader body of retests.
Right.
Not the same as semifinals, right? It should be its own set of tests. And then you get to build on top of that with the unknown and unknowable.
Yeah, I'd be interested, those that are listening, maybe put down in the comments what you think about that, and then also what you would do. Like, obviously, we're just spitting off the tongue right now.
I have not given that any prior thought.
Yeah,
just to be clear.
We've talked a lot about this in different variations, and some of them probably wouldn't be fun. I agree with you, Chris, that it would have to be tested to see if it makes sense. Now, here's my pushback to you saying it wouldn't, like, oh, I want to see it not work. Well, we say that, but the NBA always has the same standards. The NFL always has the same standards. Racing sports have the same standards. Like if you do a triathlon, we always know, like if you go to the same course, it's the exact same standards every single year, but people still do it and people watch it. The Tour de France or
track and field.
So I wonder if, maybe it's different in this sport where it wouldn't be fun since it is a little bit more chaotic and people just want to see the chaos. I just don't want to see 30 of the athletes failing. And I asked you this question in a previous clip. For those that haven't watched it, it's on our YouTube page. But I said, do you think that people will get better?
That narrows it down.
Yeah. Well, whatever the title's going to be of that one. If programming should change, do you think people will get better at those bottlenecks? And I actually don't. I think people will get better. But if we keep adding complexity, still half the field every year at semifinals is going to get time capped in workouts. And the audience, the viewer that's sitting in the stands, just as a side note here, I walked up on a couple of the last heats and I sat in the stands on Saturday and Sunday, which I didn't do on the other days. It just was, I wanted to stay kind of down there near the athletes. And I listened to people around me. And it was the first year that I've actually heard complaints about the workouts, watching the workouts.
This is the first year I've ever heard that.
Right.
And I heard it a lot. Like I was walking around talking to people between events and people that they're not athletes, they're not competitors in the sport.
Correct.
And they all had complaints about various aspects of the events, of the programming and watching it. And like that a lot of things they said didn't make sense. It didn't make sense.
Did you pull a Hiller and actually explain it to him?
Oh, I did, man. But that's me. I'm an over-explainer, so I can't help that.
No. Did you see he had a video where he was sitting next to some woman who didn't understand, and he just like helped her, walked her through it?
Oh, really?
By the end of it, she was like, "This is awesome." Yeah. But until he explained it, she was kind of in the dark.
No, I haven't seen it. We'll have to watch that. The point of me saying that is it made me kind of sad. I was like, man, this actually, like, it's not just me feeling this. Now I know that people in the stands are also feeling the same thing. Like, this is not as fun to watch as maybe it once was, or maybe it's just over time you kind of get bored of seeing people fail.
That's my
over
next
and over
question
again.
for you. Do you feel like the young guns? You think we're just the old heads, and the novelty of all this is worn off on us, and we've been fed up with years of frustration? But do you think the young kid coming in right now gives a shit about any of this stuff we're saying
great question.
right now? Or are they like, this sport's awesome, you guys are old and crazy? Because I'm starting to wonder if we're just old.
I have no idea. One thing I will say to that point, though, is that there are a lot of young female athletes who've been high-level competitors in the sport who are sitting out for burnout right now. A lot of them. And,
a lot or two?
I think it's more than two. It's if you look at the group of athletes that we would consider professional athletes, it's a good chunk of them, right? It's like 6 people tore their pec at semifinal, and it's like, that doesn't sound like very many. It was 10% of the field. Oh, that's a lot of them. Right. So it's like, there's not that many high level female or male athletes in the sport, high level, like people who are professionals. And a good chunk of them are having to take some time off. And I don't think it's because of the programming. Like, let's be completely clear. I just think that training for a sport that's unknown and unknowable is extremely stressful.
Right. And it also maybe is just a little dangerous too, because you're always trying to add more into your training to, get that leap ahead. Like, oh, will it be crossover triples next year? Something like, I know that's just crazy.
Whoa.
You get the example though, right? Like now I have to add those in. And so now there's so much chaos, and I have to do so much volume, and I have to work on all of these things that it is easy to burn out in a sport like this.
And you have to make all these guesses about things that might show up, right?
Exactly.
So like, okay, there were V-ups last year. Now we need to be focusing on L-sits, strict toes to bar, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of psychological stress competing.
And by the way, as a coach, I love that. I love doing new things and programming new things. And we just had one of our compete meetings yesterday, and I was really excited about like, ooh, how am I going to do this with seated L rope climbs? How am I going to practice or train people for pirouettes? That's exciting to me. But I do get where it could be frustrating for a high-level athlete who always has to add new things into their toolbox.
But also that's where my fashion question from earlier comes in. It's like if the Justin Bieber just started wearing something different, would they like that, or do they inherently like that shitty garment that he just made cool? Do you get what I'm saying? Like if tomorrow you were just saying the burnout and having to add all these different things, is like if we switch to a standardized thing tomorrow and put it on the cool kid, would they just all be jumped in and now that checks the box for them? Or would they be like, oh, no, what happened to that other thing you used to wear? That's what I really wanted.
Yeah. What happened in 2013 regional program?
I hate my brain. That was the sloppiest way to try to describe it.
I understood it though, Chris. So maybe that says something about my brain.
Just all scrambled eggs around here.
All right. Any final thoughts on the future of the sport? Wrap that topic up.
We just beat a dead horse, man.
Yeah. Hey, look, I'm excited. I really am fired up, and I hope that we can continue to push the sport forward. We all love it. We've been in this space for over a decade. All of our coaches are passionate about the sport of fitness.
I think we're ready to be excited again.
Yeah, I want athletes to be excited about what they're doing.
When was the last time you were excited about sport?
The sport?
Like really excited.
I'm still really excited to program. I hate when I hear athletes get frustrated by the ever-changing standards and testing body, which is not just our athletes. Like I heard it in the back all week. Listen, if we went back to the warm-up area and talked about all the miscommunication issues, that's probably what we're most frustrated with. It's not just like, oh, look at their programming or their testing body's a little bit more biased than we're used to. Like they miscalled athletes, they flipped heats around, they told the females they were going later.
That one thing was wild.
So it was thing after thing after thing. They changed the standards during the athlete briefings every single day. Like those are the issues that we really are concerned about as coaches, because we want a fair sport that all the athletes can get out there, have fun, but know what they're preparing for. And the unknown and unknowable excuse is just absolutely nonsense at this point. Like you can have unknown workouts, but still have clear standards when you present those.
You had a whole year to get it right.
Right. A whole year to test all the workouts, a whole year to have the right equipment, a whole year to test the flooring, a whole year to test every single element. And if we were to do it, yes, we would make mistakes, but even with a small organization like ours, we would have gone through a checklist and known exactly what everything would have felt like, and I feel like they missed the ball in that. So that's not it is a knock on them, but I'm excited because all those things can be improved, and guess what? We could be sitting here next year saying, man, they answered all of those questions. They answered the bell, ready to go knock out George Foreman in round 10 like Mike Tyson when we brought that up in the last podcast. All right, let's move on.
Hope you enjoyed this clip from episode 134 of the Corpus Animus podcast. To hear the other clips, you can click here on the screen or listen to the audio version in full on all major podcast providers.